Welcome to everybody. This is the sixth in a series, and so we've got a couple different experts here in a couple different areas. We have a physical therapist who's not with us today, Vicki. Bevan is an occupational therapist. We have a couple of attorneys, David Thompson, myself, will be talking here in a little bit, and then Stephanie Swarzik, who works a lot with Medicare planning. So, yeah, actually the five of us have been doing this now for several months. And like I said, this is our sixth one. We're just looking at different topics for Medicare and Medicaid, primarily for individuals under 65, although we do talk some about those that are over 65. So, yeah, if you go to the next one, there's our agenda. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about some veteran benefits today. So David, you're up.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. As Steve said, my name is David Thompson. I'm an elder law attorney here at Carlson Burnett, and one of the main areas that I work on is VA benefits. So I'm going to sort of give everyone an overview of VA benefits today. So, I mean, I want to start out by, clarifying some terminology. I think when it comes to VA benefits, people sometimes use the words compensation and pension interchangeably, and in other contexts as well outside VA. But really within the VA system, they mean two very different things. And so one way to look at it is how one contrasts with the other. So when it comes to compensation, I find it helpful to think of that as paying back the veteran or the veteran's family for the sacrifice they made by going to combat and potentially the injuries that they suffer. Pension, however, is not about paying anyone back. It's not about being wounded during service. It's really a form of financial support for people who are low income. And when I say low income, there's an important concept to keep in mind here, and that's called IVAP. And IVAP means income for VA purposes. And in order to calculate IVAP, they always deduct medical expenses from that. So based on that situation where people's expenses exceed their income, they're sort of automatically low income. And in a way, almost many of us are going to be in that position. So with compensation, it's also focused on disability. And again, as I said, combat related disability, whereas in the pension is really pension is not based on service related disability. It is, however, related to, some forms of medical dependency. I guess that might be a word we could use. And whereas, disability or compensation is based on doctor's records and, long investigation of all the different conditions that a veteran has and arriving at what they call a disability rating. When it comes to pension, we're talking about a concept called activities of daily living, or ADLs, and then a secondary concept called incidental activities of daily living, or IADLs. So I'll talk a little bit more about those in the next slide. But another interesting thing about pension is that they have made, treatment for dementia within pension. So that's important because somebody can suffer from dementia while not needing any particular assistance with ADLs or IDLs. So dementia is kind of pass go. You don't have to pass the medical eligibility test. And then another important thing to remember about pension is that it's available to surviving spouses, and that's really an important situation where you have a widow or a widower who needs some financial assistance, and in the pension context, we can provide them with some additional financial support. So next slide. So as I said, I'm going to say a little bit more about activities of daily living and incidental activities of daily living. So activities of daily living refers to those activities which are really things that all of us need on a day-to-day basis, need to do on a day-to-day basis. So included in that would be bathing, toileting, or as the VA regulations put it, attending to the wants of nature. I like that phrase. But so we've also got eating and dressing and transferring, which means getting up out of a bed or getting up out of a chair. And then, of course, walking. In order to meet the eligibility requirements for VA pension, you have to need help with at least 2 of those activities of daily living. So you don't need to require assistance with all of them. Maybe you're somebody who can walk and dress yourself, but you're not so good at eating meals on your own, and toileting is an issue for you. So you have to have at least 2 of the activities of daily living to be eligible for pension. And then when it comes to incidental activities of daily living, that refers to activities which aren't necessarily things that all of us have to do on a daily basis. They're more, well, as the word suggests, incidental. And in that category, we would put things like preparing meals. So as opposed to actually feeding yourself, an incidental activity would be cooking and preparing meals, doing housework, cleaning up your home and your immediate environment, answering the phone. That's an important one. Folks with dementia or other forms of disability often don't know how to use a phone because of cognitive impairment. And then in that same category is managing finances, paying your bills, writing checks, that sort of thing. So when it comes to incidental activities of daily living, you only need help with 1 of them to qualify. So maybe you're somebody who can do all the other things, but yet you can't manage your own finances, you can't pay bills. That would be enough in the pension context to pass the IADL test. But as I said, VA pension makes kind of special space for what we call custodial care. And if you're somebody who requires custodial care, then as I said, the ADL and the IADL requirements no longer apply. You can qualify even if you somehow can manage all those activities on your own. But generally, when we're talking about somebody with dementia, they're also having problems with ADLs and IADLs. So custodial care, I mean, it's kind of a broad concept, but in the VA documentation, it defines custodial care as someone who displays the effects of advancing age, such as dizziness, loss of memory, or poor balance. And generally, if you're somebody who's in a facility, particularly a locked unit, then you're automatically somebody who's under custodial care. So you would need that. That's the custodial care for VA pension. Next slide. So now that I've kind of given you a broad overview of the financial and medical requirements, I want to go over a couple other requirements required in order to be eligible for VA pension. So the first one of these is what we call the service test, and obviously that relates to the veteran's connection with whatever branch of service they served in. Part of the service test is that you have to have served during wartime. And there's really 4 periods of wartime under the VA regulations. And those are, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the Gulf War, which is kind of a vague concept in the sense that it lasts up until the present, even though we aren't really using the term Gulf War at this point in time. Now, I should point out, you don't actually have to have been in combat, but as long as you served during 1 or more of those periods of wartime, you meet the service test requirement. One thing to note about that, though, is that we are entering an awkward phase in the sense that, anyone who served in the military during a period that was not a wartime period, then they don't qualify. And, one thing to note is that, like the Korean War, the VA has decided that the Korean War ended on January 31st, 1955. Well, let's say you were born on or that you served starting February 1st, 1955. Well, those folks will not qualify because they're not serving during wartime. And if you count it out, people who were born, February 1st, 1955, those are people who are just now turning 65. So really, between the end of the Korean War in 1955 and the beginning of the Vietnam War in 1964, that's quite a gap there where a lot of people are not going to qualify for VA pension just based on the service test. I think that's really unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. So in addition to having served in the military during a period of wartime, you have to have served at least 90 consecutive days, and you have to have been honorably discharged when you left the military. Those requirements are usually not that hard to meet. And then there's the age and or disability requirement under pension, which is that you have to be over 65, and most applicants for pension are over 65, or you have to be permanently disabled. So if you're somebody in your 40s and your 50s, but you are permanently disabled, you can qualify for pension in that category as well. And if you're somebody who's living in a nursing home, then also, that kind of automatically passes the test for pension eligibility. And then another way of passing that test is if you're already receiving Social Security disability insurance or supplemental security income. And the reason why those count is that in order to qualify to receive SSI, you have to have been designated as disabled by the Social Security Administration. So if you're receiving SSI, that automatically means that you have been certified as disabled, which is why you would qualify for VA pension benefits. And when it comes to applying for pension, there's a whole packet of documents that you have to submit. And I'm just going to talk about some of the most important ones here. So the first document that people come into contact with is usually what we call the intent to file. And the intent to file is a short document that you file with the VA. And basically what it does, as the name suggests, is it notifies the VA that you intend to file an application for pension benefits. Now, one great thing about pension benefits is that once the intent to file is on file with the VA, you actually have 1 year from the date that the intent to file was on record to finish the application. So if you submitted your intent to file and you submitted it on March 1st, but you don't finish the actual application until November 1st, then you would still qualify under that test because you have completed the application and submitted it before that 1 year threshold. So that's a really great thing. And I'm always wondering whether that might be something that they take away, where instead of allowing you that whole year to complete your application, they might just start paying benefits just as of the date of the application, which would be a little more complicated than just having to file the intent to file document. So in addition to the intent to file, another important document is what we call the DD-214. And the DD-214 is the official discharge document that explains what branch of the service you were in, what date did you enter service, what date did you leave the service, what was the military base from which you departed when you left service. And the DD-214 is an official document that's on file with the VA. So in many cases, especially when we're talking about somebody from World War II or the Korean War, there's a very good chance that they didn't save the DD-214 for all these years. Although I've met many applicants who have saved the DD-214 for 50 years. But there is an archive with the military, and you can request a DD-214. And part of why I'm mentioning that is that lots of people have different documents. There's other kind of documents you can have that indicate when you entered the military and when you left the military. But for a VA pension application, they really want you to have an official DD-214. But as I said, that's usually not very hard. Either people have it in their possession or we can get it from the military archive. And then another important document is the doctor's examination form. So as I said, this form does not have to provide long, complicated explanations of the various medical conditions that you are suffering from. Instead, what it really has to certify is whether or not you need help with ADLs or IADLs, or whether you have dementia and needs custodial care. The doctor's examination form usually has to discuss those three areas. And I spent a lot of time when I'm working with folks on VA applications, explaining to the applicants and sometimes to the doctors themselves what kind of information the form is asking for, because it doesn't necessarily follow the list of activities of daily living. There's the questions are a little bit different, the orders are a little bit different. So it does sometimes take some clarification to make it possible for people to correctly fill out the doctor's examination form. And then some other important documents that you need to have are marriage certificates and death certificates. So if you are a surviving spouse and you're applying for surviving spouse benefits, you have to have a death certificate showing when and where the veteran passed away. And you also have to have a copy of your marriage certificate to prove that you and the veteran were in fact married and that therefore you qualify for spousal benefits. And then another document, which is sometimes necessary, is what they call an appointment of a fiduciary. And that means that basically the VA has decided that you are not capable of managing your own affairs, particularly your finances. So they are appointing a fiduciary to help you with those responsibilities. And generally the fiduciary is a child, sometimes a spouse, but generally a child. And since we are talking about situations where people are sometimes needing custodial care because they suffer from dementia, that automatically implies that there's going to be a fiduciary that needs to be appointed because the person is not competent to handle their affairs. Next slide. So you're probably wondering what the actual amounts of the pension benefits are. And I guess, by the way, I realize I haven't mentioned this terminology yet, but the terminology that's often used in the pension context and that many people use is what we call aid and attendance. And as that name suggests, to qualify for aid and attendance, you have to be somebody who needs aid and or attendance. And if the application is accepted, if you've been awarded benefits, then the amount of benefits that you receive is going to be dependent upon your status. So if you were a single veteran, widow or widower, you never married, then the maximum pension aid and attendance benefit you can qualify for is $1,912 a month. And if you're a veteran with spouse, then the benefits that the two of you can collect is $2,266 per month. And if it's a surviving spouse of a veteran, then the amount that they can receive is $1,230 a month. When you think about the costs of assisted living, in the area, it's usually somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 for assisted living. I'm not talking about nursing homes. So if you're receiving, $2,000 a month in pension, or even $1,200 a month if you're a surviving spouse, that can help out a lot. It can provide a lot of useful financial support. So sometimes it would be nice if it were a little bit more. $1,200 is not a gigantic sum. But those are the amounts for the benefits as of 2021. And those benefit amounts, of course, change every year, although they generally go up only slightly. Next slide. So one of the things about VA benefits in terms of distinguishing it from Medicaid, and we're going to say, Steve is going to say a lot more about Medicaid, but in terms of thinking about how VA benefits combine or contrast rather with Medicaid, there's a couple different things to keep in mind. And probably the most important one is the fact that VA benefits will pay for the expenses of an assisted living facility, which is different from Medicaid, because in general, Medicaid pays for nursing home care unless you qualify for something called Medicaid waiver. And we devoted a fair amount of attention to the Medicaid waiver in an earlier session, and so I'm not going to say too much about that today. But in general, it can be difficult to collect Medicaid to pay for assisted living, whereas VA benefits will cover assisted living, and oftentimes memory care is sort of included within assisted living. And as I said, when we're talking about custodial care, When we're talking about dementia, we're often talking about folks who are in a memory care unit at an assisted living facility. And then another important advantage of VA benefits is the amount of assets that you're allowed to keep. So as Steve will explain in more detail, when it's a single person applying for Medicaid, you're really not allowed to have any assets. You're allowed to have $4,000 and that's about it. Now, if you are a married couple and you're applying for Medicaid, then there's some allowances to allow what we call the community spouse, which is the spouse who's not in the facility, to retain a certain amount of assets so that the couple's assets don't get completely used up paying for the first spouse's care. The spousal impoverishment program is intended to ensure that there are assets left to take care of the community spouse. Now, the great thing about VA benefits is that even if you are a single person, you still get to keep basically $130,000 in assets that under Medicaid you can only keep if you're a couple. So this is really a tremendous benefit in the sense that, if applicants come to me and they've got, $60,000 in an IRA and maybe $25,000 in, a savings account and maybe a brokerage account on top of that, as long as their total assets don't exceed 130,000, and the specific number is actually $130,773, then you are still potentially eligible for pension benefits. And I think for single veterans, that's actually a great thing. Medicaid, as I said, under spousal impoverishment also has, an asset allowance, and under Medicaid, it's $130,000 and $130,380. Now, why there's a $393 difference between the asset limit for VA and the asset limit for Medicaid, I don't really know. They each have their own formula for calculating that. So, but basically, it's approximately the same number, just a little bit over $130,000. And then, as I said, VA, makes it takes account of dementia in a way that Medicaid doesn't always do. So, when it comes to applying for VA benefits, especially in recent years, because there were some changes that went into effect in 2018. And those changes actually made it even easier for folks with dementia, folks who need custodial care, to qualify for pension benefits. And then another great thing, as we've been talking about, is that surviving spouse can receive VA pension benefits. That's not something that's true under Medicaid. And so in many, many situations, I would almost say the majority of situations, in my experience, I'm working with surviving spouses. So that's really a great thing for them. And then another thing to think of, and I didn't list this on the slide, but there's what we call the look back period. And again, Steve's going to say a little more about that in the Medicaid context. But what the look back period means is that when you submit an application, the agency reviewing the application looks back at the 5 under Medicaid, looks back at the 5 previous years to make sure that you haven't given money away or given property away that you could have spent for your own care. So if you wrote a $50,000 check, maybe you donated it to a university, maybe you gave it to one of your kids, that can cause some serious problems under Medicaid if it falls within the 5-year look back. Now, VA, as of 2018, when those changes that I mentioned went into effect, the VA uses a 3-year look back, which is advantageous in compared to Medicaid, because let's say you made one of those transfers 4 years ago. Let's say you wrote a $50,000 check to one of your kids 4 years ago. Well, under Medicaid, that would disqualify you at least, or it would trigger a penalty period. But in the case of VA pension benefits, because it's not within the 3-year look back period, it doesn't make any difference. So, it's a little bit of a benefit when you're talking about that extra 2 years that are going to come under examination when you apply for Medicaid, but not when you apply for VA benefits. And then I thought maybe, to just kind of close out, I'd sort of give you some, provide you with some statistics which really indicate just how important VA benefits are. I think sometimes we think of, VA benefits as, we think of veterans as kind of a subset, and there really are a significant part of the population. As a matter of fact, we have 21 million veterans in the United States. And when you think about that 21 million people, 46% of those, or approximately 9.7 million, are people who are over 65. So that really tells you something in terms of really needing to focus on the needs of veterans who are seniors. And when you look at the total number of Americans under 65, there's about 48 million. So of that 48 million, 30% of those people are either veterans or the spouses of veterans. So again, that's like almost a third of seniors, a third of folks who are over the age of 65. So we really are talking about a huge number of people. But in that context, in terms of talking about how many people, it's kind of important to circle back to what I started with, which is the difference between disability compensation and pension with aid and attendance. Disability compensation is much more widely known, and it's kind of something that a lot of people automatically think about because, of course, if you've been injured in the line of duty, or if you've lost your life in the line of duty and you've left a spouse or a family, then that's a situation where you would need to be compensated. But when it comes to pension and aid and attendance, it's just not very widely known. People don't necessarily realize that there is that benefit out there. And so as a result of that sort of lack of knowledge, the number of veterans and spouses who are receiving pension benefits is really just a little bit over 400,000. So when you compare that 400,000 number to the 5.7 million people who are receiving disability compensation, it really is a huge difference. And it's even a bigger difference when you take into account the fact that there's an estimated 15.5 million people, or million veterans or veteran spouses out there who would be eligible for pension and aid and attendance benefits, but just don't know about it and just aren't aware of what they need to do to go through the application process. So that's where people like me and folks at veteran service organizations come into play, not only to spread the word about pension and aid and attendance benefits, but also to help people through the application process. And as I said at the beginning, disability-related compensation, it's about various physical conditions and what are the different ratings that the VA assigns to those different physical conditions. How do they interact with one another? Maybe you have suffered a loss of limb. Maybe you're blind. Maybe you've had permanent injury that makes it impossible for you to work. Each one of those physical conditions will result in a formula that's used to calculate your disability rating under disability-related compensation. But when we're talking about veterans benefits, it's as I said, it's relatively straightforward in terms of how you qualify. But because so many people don't really know about it, there's really value added when we can spread the word and help people understand how pension benefits can help them, particularly in situations where you're dealing with dementia and the need for custodial care. So with that, I will turn it over to the next speaker. I think we'll have some Q&A at the end. So if anyone has any questions about anything I've said here, happy to go into more detail about the application process or anything else. And just want to thank everybody for listening.
I'm just going to take about 2 minutes. So when you look at aid and attendance versus Medicaid, it's important to look at both when you're dealing with veterans. And so we look at a number of different planning strategies for both of those. But aid and attendance is certainly one we want to look at for veterans. So then the other slide there, I'm just going to, again, mention that. We do a lot with irrevocable trust. So I just want to put that up there because I think there's still some misunderstanding that irrevocable trusts are difficult to work with or really tie up assets just indefinitely, and they don't. There's a really powerful tool that we can use. And again, we don't use those in every case, but we do use those in a lot of cases. So I just want to make sure you're familiar with both of those things, just in case you've got somebody that wants to look at it. And, we sit down at no charge and just take a look at things and say, okay, here's what we recommend. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Steve. That was a great dive into some different veteran services that people just aren't aware of. And obviously, our veterans are super important to us, so we want to make sure that they're getting all the benefits that they deserve and are due. So my name's Stephanie Swerzik. I'm the owner of Simplified Financial Solutions. I assist people with Medicare options, Medicaid spend downs, health insurance through the marketplace and through other avenues. So today I just want to touch a little bit about how veterans might be impacted by Medicare benefits. A lot of veterans choose not to enroll in Medicare because they are eligible for the VA health benefits. VA is not insurance. It is a benefit that's paid through the VA. And it's treated somewhat similar to what we would consider an HMO. So it requires referrals if a specialist is wanting to be seen. So the eligibility for VA benefits, it's requires 2 years of active duty, and then they're assigned, veterans are assigned priority groups, and those are assigned based on both income and any service-connected disability. So they're put into groups, and the different groups have different cost share that they might have to pay some co-pays, and I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that everything through the VA is free, and that's not always the case. It's affordable, but not always free. So the VA recommends many times that when members are first eligible for Medicare, whether that's when they're turning 65 or if they are starting to then receive the Social Security disability and 24 are eligible for Medicare 24 months after they're starting to receive benefits, that they do actually apply for Medicare Part B. A lot of veterans will take only Part A with Medicare, which helps with some hospitalization costs because it's free. But if they do enroll in Part B, they will get maybe some additional benefits that are available to people that have Medicare as well as the VA benefits. So if a veteran chooses not to enroll in Medicare Part B when they're first eligible, and then decides down the road that they might want to enroll and get some of those, have a little bit more benefits available to them, it would be subject to a late enrollment penalty because VA benefits are not considered credible coverage when it comes to the Part B services, which are mostly the medical needs. The prescription drug coverage with the VA is considered credible, so they wouldn't be subject to a penalty for drug coverage, but I'm going to just really focus on parts A and B today. Next slide, please. Then there's two different programs. The VA and Medicare are two different programs. They don't coordinate benefits, so they're not sharing information with one another. So somebody may ask, why do they need both? Why do they need Medicare too? And it's really just to give them some more flexibility. If they have Medicare, then they have access to civilian doctors if they want to get a second opinion, or if it's more convenient, maybe the closest VA facility is a 45-minute drive where a specialist might be 10 minutes away and they want to see that specialist. Recently, they've changed some of the programming with the VA. They have what's called community care. So if a person is a specific distance away from a VA facility, they would have access through their community care program, and the VA would still help to pay for those benefits. But it does require referral and pre-authorization through the VA, which can take some time. So having access to Medicare shortens that wait time and potentially shortens the time to get into a specialist. The services, while good, at the VA are somewhat limited. So they don't have as many providers available as a member would if they were just going to a specialist that's available to everyone that accepts Medicare. So so it could shorten their wait time if they have Medicare as well. Some additional things that if the veteran has Medicare plan too, they might have access to additional benefits. So there's Medicare Advantage plans that offer some things that the VA may not provide to the veteran, such as dental benefits, vision. Some people do get vision through the VA. It just depends on service-related disabilities. They might want to get a gym membership, and there's some additional things that come with those Medicare Advantage plans. So before I move on to the next topic, which is TRICARE a little bit, so Medicare is a good way to provide some additional benefits and offerings to the veteran, but there's also some things that the veteran needs to know. If they choose a plan such as a Medicare Advantage plan, it does have a network, so they have to be cautious about the provider that they're choosing because they would be confined to a network. They can choose to have their drug coverage provided still through the VA facility and not take a Medicare drug plan, might save them some money there. Just to share a personal experience, I did have a veteran that I was working with recently, and he has both a Medicare prescription drug plan and he gets some of his medication through the VA. So they can pick and choose which medications they get from which benefit plan, and he chooses to get his some of his brand name prescriptions outside of the VA because he says recently the VA is having a hard time getting some of those medications in. So that's another example as to why having both might provide them some additional benefits that they might not be able to get immediately through the VA. So I want to talk a little bit, just touch on TRICARE for Life. TRICARE for Life is for veterans that have a specific service. They were enlisted for a certain number of years. TRICARE for Life, it's really a Medicare wraparound, so they have to have Medicare. The veteran has Medicare Part A and Part B, and then TRICARE for Life fills all the gaps. It wraps around and pretty much takes care of all the other cost share that Medicare is not covering. So that is really a great plan. Sometimes it doesn't cover things like dental. And so people that members that have TRICARE for Life will sometimes choose a Medicare Advantage plan to go with just to get some of those extra perks like the gym membership and dental. But you have to be very cautious that we're not disrupting anything that they might be getting through the TRICARE for Life program. So to get that, they must have served 20 years and have retired from the military to receive those benefits. And then CHAMP VA is not for veterans, but it is for the spouses and dependents of a veteran. If the veteran is totally disabled due to a service-connected disability, then their family can get them the CHAMP VA benefits. And it is very comprehensive coverage. Generally, we are not looking at adding any additional like Medicare Advantage plans to go with that because it can definitely complicate coordination of the benefits. So, and that is all I have. So I'm really looking forward to Bevian's interview. And so I'm going to let you take it away, Bevian. Thank you.
I have learned a lot from our three presenters so far, and hopefully at the end of the sessions, we'll have questions for everybody. And we have been talking about benefits for our veterans themselves, but veterans are members of families. And our next guest is going to talk to us about some of the services or benefits available to family members of our military personnel. And Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't we start with having you introduce yourself and the organization that you work for?
You are so welcome. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate you thinking of me, Bevan. I am Carolyn Olson. Most people call me CJ. It's just easier. And I actually work for the United States Air Force. I am the EFMP Family Support Coordinator, which stands for the Exceptional Family Member Program. So I guess I already said that, EFMP. So most active duty folks, and this is with all sister services, if you are identified as EFMP, most people know what you're talking about.
I think I just recently learned, I've known Carolyn for a few years, but I think I just recently learned that there is more than one branch or arm of the Exceptional Family Member Program.
Yeah, it's slightly dated, like any other government process. After the last 30 years of being involved with these folks, you know how that goes. But so there's EFMP assignments, which is down in Texas, and they do just that, the assignments. Mission comes first, but we also have figured out in the last recently 10, 20 years that it's more cost effective to keep families where we can take care of you. So they're really the ones that say, you know, we really need this lady at Columbus, Mississippi, but her husband has cancer and they don't have a compound pharmacy there that can take care of him. So let's look if we can get him to Wright Pat, Ohio, or something like that. So they do the assignments, and then there's also EFMP medical. So once assignments clear somebody to move somewhere, the medical folks are the ones that evaluate their kind of a holistic view of not just medical, but do we have the schools that the kids need there? Do we have the PT, OT, and other services, legal, educational, medical support services that they need? So the medical folks are the ones that have to do all the paperwork. And I'm sort of like the fun captain. I love my job. I don't have to tell anybody bad news. I am a family support coordinator. So the best way to think of it is a non-medical case manager. So the most part of my job is connecting families. So, you know, with resources on and off base. So that's special needs, active duty families is the primary part of my job. So somebody comes here from Germany and they say, oh, we had to move here because we just had a baby that has cerebral palsy. Well, I'm going to connect them with, you know, the folks over at the cerebral palsy UCP here in Omaha. Or autism. We have a million of, you know, different rich resources for autism. I don't have to lie when it comes to education or medical or legal services in this area. This base is very fortunate to have a community that really wraps their arms around our families and takes care of them. But so I also, along the lines of the fun captain, I get to do camps, educational seminars, support groups, and just lots of different collaborations in the surrounding metropolitan area. And the minute that, you know, I met Bev Ann and was invited out to the senior resource group, I thought, oh, I'll never need to know about Champ VA or TRICARE for Life. You know, this is all, and you forget there's a ton. I've got about 20,000 retirees in this area and their families. So that's not including their families. So lots and lots of folks that I need to be, you know, connected with. So it's just the other part of my job is to go out and meet people like you. And then when somebody comes across my office or comes to my office and says, hey, do you know anything about somebody that can come into my home and modify it so we can have the quality of life that we deserve? I go, oh yeah, I know exactly who to call, and she's a fantastic person. Or we're having legal trouble, we're having school trouble. I know all the folks at PTI. So I get to meet people. That's basically what I do, and then connect folks. So it's a pretty good gig.
Oh yeah, you know, I can't think of anybody better for it than someone who calls themselves a fun captain. So,
Well, exactly.
Who is your target? Is it families with, you know, children who have disabilities? Is it military whose spouse has a disability? Who are some of the people you're serving here in our community?
Right. All the above. So we serve active duty special needs families as well as the retirees, the Guard, Reserve, and we have a lot of GSUs, so geographically separated units like Sioux City. Our runway is tore up, so we have a lot of folks in Lincoln, and I've even got a recruiter that works in the Mall of America in Minneapolis. Yeah, those are basically my target audience, but it's just whoever's a dependent of the active duty person.
Okay.
And so a lot of times it's the spouse, more often than not, it's the children. But we even have recently some of our younger airmen getting custody, if you will, of their parents with disabilities. So from the NICU to the nursing home, I covered all diagnoses, all different disabilities, abilities. They are all welcome as long as they are coded as EF&P. I can help them out. So
And
that's what's
so,
good with my pocket of money over
there
here.
you go. Well, then that led me to two questions. One, how does someone get coded as EFMP? And then secondly, how do they find you? If they don't happen to run across, somebody like us who know you.
Yeah, I do appreciate those referrals though.
Okay.
There is an Air Force instruction that says thou shalt, and thou shalt identify your family member as EFMP and get them enrolled through the med group. So that was the EFMP medical I was talking about. If they have any kind of medical need, educational need, or disability that they're aware of, if they even question it. But there's not a lot of teeth to that AFI because it says thou shalt, but if you don't, it doesn't say anything else. So it is mostly a self-identification process, especially with the learning things, because the schools don't talk to the MTF, which is Military Treatment Facility, Erling Berquist, if you will. We do a lot of commanders calls and first shirt briefings and things like that, where we educate. When newcomers orientation, we talk to the active duty members about enrolling their folks and how to do that. So they would do that over the med group. So sometimes when they PCS here, they have to make an initial appointment with their PCM over the med group, and their PCM might notice something that qualifies for EFMP, and they will help them get enrolled through the med group. And so I have a good working relationship with the med group enrollment folks. There's a guy over there named Sergeant Robinson Divert, and he is a fabulous human being. I don't know what I'm going to do when he PCSs, but he is the first person to hand that newly enrolled person my card, and my phone number and all my information. And so we can get them on our distro list and get them connected with our Facebook and any other phone numbers and all that good stuff. So we can get them a newsletter and make sure that they're aware of the different events and activities that we have coming up.
That's good. Well, I'm going to give you a chance in a minute to give your name and how to reach out to you. But I was a military dependent. My father's active duty, and I had a younger brother with a disability. And this was over 40 years ago when I was a child with a child brother with a disability, and we didn't have a great service like yours. And I can remember my parents, moving to a place, just kind of knowing my mom would spend a couple of weeks looking around for things that my brother could utilize, using the yellow pages. Okay. So this is a wonderful service for our military families. Do you find that they're going out to the website? Are they researching ahead of time to find out what's in a place before they even put it on their list of selections?
Well, we don't always get our dream base, our base of preference. But so when you do get orders, I'm finding that most of my families are definitely researching whether there's EFMP or not. Of course, they Google the heck out of the area, right? But they're is a well enough known program that people know that there is someone like me, and Johnny is my other partner there, that they can reach out to. And so they're putting it on all our contact information on all of the base splash pages. So if you just Google 55th Wing or Offutt Air Force Base, it'll come up with the EFMP numbers on there, at least the medical and family support coordinators on there. So that is good. But you're right. I have a support group that I work with during the week, and there's one couple that is retired, but they have a 20-year-old and a 24-year-old, and even with that, when their girls were born, they were down in Tucson, and they really had to do a lot of stuff on their own. And her husband was the active duty member, and he was highly deployable. He had a very high ops tempo, and she was in Tucson with no family and no support, and not really anything as an EFMP. So she's been through it all, and I actually work with her quite a bit because she's very knowledgeable about what works and what doesn't. And you really should do this, CJ. And I'm thinking, hey, that's a great idea. So I had the autonomy to kind of form the program to our base's needs. So like if I was at a training base, that would be primarily 18, 19, 20-year-olds that oftentimes aren't married, don't have kids, things like that. So there's not a very robust EFMP program. But here at Omaha, we have so many retirees, and we have just a little bit of everything. We have airmen that this is their first base, to, like I said, the retirees. So it's very nice to have all these rich resources in this area.
Well, it is wonderful. We have just a few minutes left in our session. If you could share the best contact information for people to get hold of you with questions.
Absolutely. I could also type it in the chat box, but it's Carolyn, spelled like Caroline, CAROLINE .Olson, OLSON .1, so number 1, at us.af.mil. So that's as in United States .af as in Air Force .mil as in military.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And
thank you. This is great information.
Oh, good.
I learned some things today.
Excellent. I hope all of us did.
David, the first question is, I'm going to tee that up to you. The question is, does the veteran pension offset Social Security disability payments? And you're on mute.
Okay, so this is actually where that concept of IVAP, or income for VA purposes, comes into play. Because as I said, most people have an IVAP of 0, because when you take the costs of the facility or whatever other medical costs they have and subtract that from their income, it's usually a negative number. And that included in that calculation are whatever Social Security benefits one receives. So it's very, very unlikely that somebody's going to make enough Social Security that it's going to offset what they're paying for the facility. So Social Security does not get in any way in terms of eligibility for pension with aid and attendance.
Okay, very good. And somebody had asked if they could get a copy of the presentation. I put in chat too, but just in case anybody didn't see those notes, there'll be a little editing to clean up the recording, and then the recording gets sent out to everybody after the presentation, in addition to the other series, in case there's any that you'd like to replay, or you have the ability to go back and re-listen to the presentation from today. And then I don't know if I didn't see any additional questions. Do any of our other panel have any direct questions?
I have a question for David. I know that there are offices where military people can go to get information about the pension and the disability information. And I think I've heard you talk about this a little bit before. you also can help somebody work through that process. Are there advantages or disadvantages? How does somebody get started?
With the pension application?
Yeah, the pension application.
Well, I mean, there are veteran services offices out there that you can call, although I think I would say that aid and attendance is in a way not very well understood by a lot of those organizations as well as the general public. So that's where you can start. But otherwise, I mean, I think probably, going online and typing in pension with aid and attendance. I mean, aid and attendance is really the key terms, and that's going to give you information about whether there's any, nonprofits or folks like me in a law firm environment who can help you with VA applications. But other than that, I mean, this is not something that's, widely publicized. Nobody gets anything in the mail saying, hey, why don't you apply for aid and attendance? So.
Okay. Well, it sounds like it sounds like something that people have earned, right? They have earned this through their service, and something worth sharing with folks. I actually had not really, and it applies the same if a military person is under 65 and has that disability, then they are also eligible to add that pension, right, to their.
Well, and I would just add too, for clarity, I mean, all the great programs that Stephanie was talking about, those are all handled under a different umbrella than pension benefits. So you can think of disability compensation as one bucket. You can think of pension with aid and attendance as another bucket. And then all the things that Stephanie was talking about would really come under healthcare. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can, benefit from, some of those programs while you're also receiving pension.
Thank you.
That's a good point. And I just want to invite everyone to register and join us for our next, which is the 7th in a series on September 15th at noon again. And this time we're going to be talking about how Medicare and Medicaid help support living in your home in Nebraska. There's been some changes just within the last couple of weeks. And so I'd encourage everybody to join in and see what's changed and how we might serve people with disabilities in our community. So thanks for your time, and everyone have a great day.